evening, everybody. Welcome to the E.N. Jenckes Store Museum. It's great to see you all here tonight, and we're celebrating Women's History Month today. So first, I want to give a few housekeeping details, in that we have lots going on. Among them is a raffle that we're having. The prize is $1,000, and the tickets are $10 a piece. Any of you can see Ursula out front. You know, this is great for the coming warm season. You can throw a barbecue. We have a list of people who signed in, so you can invite us all. This Sunday from 11 to 3, right here, we have corned beef and cabbage for St. Patrick's Day. You can eat in or take it out. It's always delicious, so please stop by or call in and order.
That's not this Sunday.
I'm sorry, next Sunday. This Sunday is
The dogs.
Irish Soda Club.
17th. This Sunday is
Private party. A private party.
a
Yeah.
private party, but it's also...
The corned beef and cabbage dinner. Yes, it is.
Oh, that's the next one.
Spring forward.
Thank you. Spring forward. All right, so that's Sunday the 17th. I'm sorry, the 17th is the corned beef and cabbage. Then Thursday on the 28th, from 7 to 9 p.m., we have an art show by the Douglas Middle School. So please stop by and see how talented our young people are. On Wednesday the 10th, this is as far as I'm going to go, Wednesday the 10th, we have a woman coming back who will give an interpretation of Frances Perkins. And this will be part one. And Frances Perkins was the first woman in the U.S. Cabinet. She was the Labor Secretary, and she was actually born in Worcester. So she will come and give us the first interpretation of her younger life in April, and then she will come back in the fall and give an interpretation of her older years. So we welcome you all to come back and enjoy that.
That's in April.
So tonight, because it's Women's History Month, we thought it would be great to have a talk or hold a salon with some of the folks who have experienced a lot of history in Douglas. And we invited Dolores Colinero, our treasurer of the Douglas Historical Society, but she was a little under the weather this morning and decided not to come. So we are left with, drum roll, the two Shirleys. Mrs. Shirley Cooney in the green, and Shirley Mosczynski in the purple. So we're going to ask them a few questions, have them have a conversation among each other themselves, and then we're going to open it to the audience for questions. Because they've both been very active in this community, but they come from very different places. Mrs. Cooney came to this country in 1958, and she was what is commonly known as a war bride, right?
I guess so.
Sort of. Because she met her husband through
He was in the Air Force.
the Air Force.
It was the Korean experience, I guess, yeah.
But you were born in England. Shirley Cooney is an immigrant to this country. And she's going to share some of her experiences. And then Shirley Mosczynski was born or raised in Uxbridge. She grew up in Uxbridge and then went to nursing school. But she married Leon, and his family immigrated to this country. So the immigrant theme runs through both stories.
And we both followed our husbands, as was appropriate in those days.
So Shirley, why don't you kick it off, Shirley C., with a memory of what it was like to be a young woman in Douglas.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'll start right away with the fact that I was a child of the war. So I remember some really, really outstanding things. I was there only with my mother. My father was away at sea, transporting troops, ammunition and guns and what have they needed to fight the war. So it was my mother and I. So my mother became number one, a home guard, as they called it, who had to check up and down the streets to make sure that the lights were all out, because you couldn't show any lights. Before you opened your door, you had to turn your light out, because they didn't want any visibility from the sky. In between that job, she worked in a munitions factory, because it was mostly women that worked. It wasn't, very few men. If they were older and a little more unable to do physical work, so they were not in the service. But they served as firemen and police officers and emergency people to drive vehicles. My mother had a gun, and I was fascinated with it as a child because it had a bayonet on it. And I would say to my mother, "Oh, you'll go to shoot somebody?" And she said, no, I don't think I will go that far. But she said, "I will give him the bayonet if he's still alive." And oftentimes the planes would get shot down, and sometimes the pilot was alive and sometimes he wasn't. So then you had to apprehend this person, and she thought that the bayonet was a wonderful object, so she could poke someone and say, "You go this way," you know. But anyway, so that was part of my experience as sort of the tag-along child. Going to school was difficult because you had to wear gas masks. You couldn't play without your gas mask. You couldn't go to school without a gas mask. It was always on you. And during your classroom sessions, they'd blow the whistle and you'd have to put it on, and you'd have to do your schoolwork with the gas mask on. So that in the event that it did have to happen, that we wouldn't be afraid of it. That was not pleasant. It also wasn't pleasant for the school nurse to come around and stick a spoon in your mouth with cod liver oil. And that was a policy of the government to keep our young people healthy. Well, they did change that, and they mixed it up with malt, which is a sweetener of some kind. So that became a little more acceptable and not as, you know. But that was not pleasant. But they did give you kinds of orange juice that was concentrated. You had a bomb shelter in your house. Remember, we took the dining room table out of the dining room, and the bomb shelter, that would be possibly only if you got kind of a direct hit. You might survive, you might, but not always, because it was made of cast iron. And anyway, so those are my childhood experiences of sleeping in the bomb shelter, was kind of exciting, because you'd wear your snowsuit or what have you. And so we got through that. There were some not pleasant scenes, because we lived on the direct coast, and it meant that the Germans at that particular time would land at any time. So I remember tagging along with my mother, and we took down all the street signs. Main Street and Depot Street and Mechanic Street. We'd take all the signs down and put them in a truck, and someone would take them away. Because we expected the Germans to land any day. So we thought that would be a way to confuse them a little bit. They wouldn't know where they were going.
So we have some insight into Mrs. Cooney's tactics and where she got some of her experience. But let's have some from Shirley M. here, and you can talk about your childhood, or why did you go into nursing? Because she is a retired RN.
Well, I'd like to start out to make a comparison of what Shirley went through and here. So I remember
Rationing,
rationing, right?
rationing, yeah.
No butter, margarine,
No
which
sugar.
was Crisco, and you colored it.
Yes.
But interesting, when you mention like looking for bombs or, you know, planes going over. So what we experienced here was my grandfather and grandmother's farm in South Uxbridge. Beautiful flat field. Piper cubs would land there. And they had a hangar off to the side. And my other grandparents lived in Whitensville. And my grandfather would drive truck into Boston because the mill was making, or the Whiten machine was making ammunition. And he would leave at midnight to go into Boston. And the front, the lights on the big truck had to have black tape over them. So
Over the headlights.
over the headlights. And yeah, we had to keep our shades down in the house. I remember the school in Uxbridge, which is the little Catholic school by the cemetery. It was our junior high eventually in Uxbridge, but it had a tower. And my mother and father would have a certain time to go up into the tower and observe for any planes coming over. And what were they? And you had to write down the numbers or anything that was on them. And I would go up and spot planes with them. And I was about probably 7, 8 years old at that time. Food, yes, gas was rationed. So interesting, I think, comparison. You lived in a more dangerous situation.
We're just close by.
Yeah.
27 miles, I think.
But very interesting, and yeah, it was good that it was over. I remember the cover. I think it was on Life magazine when everybody was dancing in the street.
Yeah.
The sailor was dancing with this nurse or whoever she was. Everybody was just thrilled. And I remember in North Uxbridge where we lived, the street was just packed with everybody.
Everyone
out
had
there.
a party.
Oh, we did, yes. As to why I went into nursing, women in those days, they were either teachers or they were nurses. Very few got to be doctors. It was just very, very restricted. You were expected to stay home, take care of the kids, clean the house, do the chores, whatever. And some of us, well, hey, we keep doing it anyhow, well, no matter what else we're doing. So, but nursing, it was caring for people. And ironically, when I was a little kid, my parents couldn't get me into a hospital to visit anybody. No way. That was scary. But for whatever reason, as I, and as even kids nowadays, they get older, they grow up, and
They learn.
they learn. And I met some really good friends I've stayed in touch with over the years. Most of them are gone by now from nursing. But it was a good experience. And I still, to this day, today I just met with some of the nurses that I worked with at Dick Kimball because we keep in touch. And things happen to all of us, and it's a good warm feeling for whoever is experiencing something unfortunate. So.
We had anything go wrong with our kids, it was always Dr. Mosczynski that we went to.
Still is. So thank you for sharing those memories. And what we'd like to talk about now is you both ended up in Douglas. Maybe you recall the time you met, or maybe you don't. But how did Douglas radicalize you
Oh my
both?
God. You mean, how did I radicalize Douglas?
All right, relax, everybody. We're gonna be here a while.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Where did she begin?
She was the bomb that went off.
When I wrote down here in notes, it was hard to figure out in this busy life I've had. I just got marriage. I met a wonderful man who could never be replaced, and we had a wonderful life together. But I met him in England, and it was love at first sight. However, we didn't plan to get married. I knew him for 2.5 years. And that was possibly the last thing we thought about, even though we were madly in love. We would have to wait on getting married because he wanted to go back to school. And I thought I was on the young side. So I'd like to wait a bit. I'd already told the young man that my first date, he wanted to get married, and I said, no. I don't want any part of that. You're very nice, and I'm fond of you, but. So it took me a long time for Ann Burgess, by the way, who I think most of you know as our former tax collector, and she was dating this American, much to my chagrin. And she said, I have met this young man. And she said, how about we arrange a double date? And I said, no, I'm not going to be seen out with an American. You know what they want, don't you? Which was most of the time was the truth. Anyway, she said on the second try around, you know, she said, you wouldn't know he was an American. I said, well, you know. Anyway, I think on the third or fourth try, she kept pushing and pushing. I know you'll like him, she said, and Al's coming out, and he'll come out with Dan, and we'll go out and have a nice meal, and that's the end of it. Needless to say, it wasn't. So we had a lovely meal, and we left the restaurant, and I had promised Ann Burgess, don't leave me. We want to stay together, you know. And I don't know this guy, and I'm not crazy about Americans. So, which was the truth. Anyway, they just had a bad reputation, you know. They were occupying a country, and there was a lot of hostility, because they used to raise hell in the pubs, you know, because they were all young Americans. So anyway, we took a long walk to the beach, and it was only probably 500 yards away. And I didn't get home until 4 in the morning. And I didn't go to work the next day. And Ann Burgess called the house and said, are you okay? Because my mother was at the top of the stairs when I got home. Because we had to get a cab because the buses stop at 11 o'clock. So that's the beginning of the romance. And it was beautiful. So we were married. The reason being is that to get a visa to come to immigrate, and I want to bring this up because we're all talking about nasty immigrants, you know, with brown skin. Well, I didn't have brown skin, but I came from the British Isles, and there was a quota system in place. And it would have been 7 years before I could have applied for a visa. Well, I was 22, and Dan was almost 24. I don't think we were going to wait for 7 years. So we married. And I became an immigrant by reason of being a dependent of an American serviceman. And that was one big eye-opener. You cannot get into the country like that. It takes years. So to say that those illegals are coming in, they're desperate. They're just desperate. They didn't have, like I had, to get married, which was pretty desperate. But it's quite different today. The world is in turmoil. People are dying. They're drowning in the Mediterranean. They're drowning in the English Channel because they're trying to get away from horror. And nobody really gives a damn. So I can identify with that. If you only knew that it was not easy, and especially I spoke English, and those people oftentimes had a difficult time communicating. So my whole experience with coming to Douglas was kind of a big eye-opener. Number one, I was really not happy with the racist comments. And it was not dark-colored skin. It was reference to ethnicity that I found was appalling. I'd never heard anything like I had heard, and I'm not going to repeat it. My father said to Dan at one point in the house, "Well, where do you come from?" And he said, "I come from New England." My father was a world traveler, so he said, "Well, I'm grateful for that." He said, "If you were really thinking that Shirley would go with you to the United States," he said, "I would prefer she didn't go south of the Mason-Dixon line." Because he knew he had traveled the world. So my experience at that time, of course it was the late 50s, the election of Richard Nixon and John Kennedy was surfacing. And all I said to him at that point, if Nixon wins, I want to go back. So here I am. Needless to say, so that was the beginning of that. Go ahead.
So I just want to, so in the interest of full disclosure, Shirley M is my mother. But I want to ask her to share her experiences as a young woman who married a first generation Polish person.
Yes, I
Polish
didn't
man.
say it. I didn't say it.
Polak.
That's right.
Shirley married
I never heard
Leon,
of the word.
but his parents had moved to Douglas in the 30s because they saved their money, and during the Great Depression they bought a farm on Oak Street. And eventually Shirley and Leon built a house just down the road from them. But my grandparents never fully spoke English. So share some memories of what it was like being less than perfectly able to communicate with your in-laws. Let's put it that way.
Well, first of all, after I graduated from high school, then I went into nursing school. And ironically, I met Leon when I graduated from high school, and he had just graduated from college. And he there was a requirement. He had to either go into the service or be drafted. And he said, no, they'll draft me first. And this was the Korean War time. And so he went into the service, and by the way, we met at friends, my friends and his friends, showers, wedding showers and so forth. So I thought, well, I'm going into nursing, he's off to serve his time, and I probably won't ever see him again. Needless to say, we knew each other for 5 years. I got out of nursing and he
And you
got
were
out of
madly
the
in
service.
love.
Yeah, we were. It was the light of my life.
Yes, I know.
We built a home, lived in our basement for 11 years. And we fixed it up. It was warm, comfortable, and we had a garden. I did most of the vegetables, but he helped with the planting and the gathering of the vegetables. And we were sort of like, we're going to do this without taking out a mortgage. Well, then prices started to go up, and we were like, you know what, this isn't going to work. So we borrowed $5,000 to finish our house. But meanwhile, as we did that, we would save up so much money, go down to Brewster Lumber in Providence, and bring home windows, lumber, but most of the lumber in that house, he and his dad cut and had it milled, so it's lumber off the land or purchased from nearby forests.
Cool.
Very few pieces we had to buy. He purchased a steel beam from Worcester, which had been taken out of a building. So that goes through the center of the house, and the carpenter that helped us build it said, these floors will never tilt. Oak floors. And I can remember being out there in the cold when we were stacking this lumber, and you had to put wedges between each piece all along and wrap wire around them so the boards wouldn't curve until you were ready to use. We bought an old planer that some farmer was getting rid of for $100, and we sized all the boards so that they would all be the same. Anyhow, he, after he got out of the service, he went on to go to Clark for, I think, a year, and transferred to Worcester State at the time and got his master's. He was teaching, and he was a history major, but got the job of science, general science, and loved it.
Oh, okay.
And we had our first daughter, Lisa, and had 2 other daughters, and they were the light of his life and mine. And everybody commented how you could see Leon going through town with his 3 girls. With the in-laws, they're very kind. My mother-in-law told me in her broken English that many times I was better to her than some of her own family. But I was not the same religion. And at those times, that made a big difference. So
The Poles were Catholic, right?
as we were building our house, we did not get a deed to the land we were building on right away, because he, as the only boy. His brother died very young. He was automatically probably going to have all the property. That was routine in those days. So, although he wasn't happy with that, he did say, okay, I'm not going to have a deed to this property, we're not going to build any further. And we looked into going to Alaska because at that time, they needed teachers and they needed nurses. So probably came like that close, but no, they wanted us to stay, so we did. And that was my introduction into Douglas, where I met the Cooneys, the Downses, and really Dick Downs, Louis Furneaux, a few other different people that are passed.
Charlotte couple.
They had gone to school with Leon, although Leon left to go to school out in Wisconsin, and then to Providence College, and then to finally his master's at Worcester State. We met some good people, again, back in Douglas, the Coppolas, Tony and Charlotte. Gracie Dudley, who was quite the lady, a nurse. Actually, she was a World War II nurse, yeah. Yeah, great. And she recommended that I go to work at Day Kimball if I thought I wanted to get back into nursing, because I had stayed home with the kids.
One in a million.
Yeah. So, and many other people, and we had a common interest. We wanted better schools for our kids. And I can never put into detail all the shenanigans we went into to at least make some interest in getting better schools. We tried to finagle and throw caucuses that the Dems and the Republicans. Very interesting, because there was a mill owner.
That's exactly it. I'm just going to interrupt a second because when I was growing up, back in the dark ages,
Run up there and get those numbers.
this was a mill town. Okay, so you had the mill that's down at Gilboa. You had the mill that's now the
Haywood Landing?
Haywood Landing. That was also a textile mill. You had cotton mill apartments and things. Those buildings had been axe mills before that, but the entire focus of the town was on working in the mill and making sure that the mill owner was happy so that he would never take the mill anywhere else. So at a very young age, I was introduced to the politics of a mill town and to the radical men and women who wanted to fight to make the schools better, but also to get more equity in the town as far as maintenance of roads and public services go. So there was Madeline Chupka and Norma Dix
Alan Chupka.
and Alan Chupka. So, go into a few stories about what you needed to do. There were 2 votes on regional school with this crazy town called Sutton. I mean, my God, what would we regionalize with them for, right? So at least two efforts. I know at least one time Mrs. Cooney tried to, manipulate me into wearing a T-shirt into a polling place and almost got me arrested. I was just, it was just awful.
It was great. It was great.
So the campaigns, and this was before, all right, because we're in this old store, but this was before computers and before smartphones. So you had to do all these calculations and things. If you wanted to get people out to vote, and get them to the polls, you worked off of paper.
Yeah.
And those things called rotary dial phones. It was not an easy feat, so
So,
Our children were trained though.
so we would meet at,
Somebody's house,
yeah, and
Norma did.
Norma Dix,
A
yeah,
double list.
Gary Dix, and we would start out by, okay, who voted? So we'd have our kids
well, we
running.
had a double list
Yeah,
of the voters' lists,
yeah,
one at the polls
yeah,
and one of ours, and they all had numbers.
yeah.
And our children
Ran to
would
get the
be the
list.
runners. And they would run to the polls and grab the ticket with all the numbers that the person working on our behalf was there for, run back to the house, wherever it was, or on a bicycle sometimes, that the people at the house then said, oh, shit, she didn't vote. Get on the phone,
Yes,
quick.
yes.
So we had maybe one phone, you know, and we had to, oh, this one, we've got 7 phone numbers, Jesus Christ. You know, I mean, we really had to work like a bugger. And all of our children never miss voting.
Yeah, that's right.
They know how difficult it is. You can call 50 people to vote and you might get 4. And that's when they say the election was rigged. They have no goddamn clue how hard it is to get a voter to come and vote.
Yes.
They don't come out. So we said, no. But I can remember the first time Sean went to school, the first grade. So I said to him, ask your teacher if you can bring a textbook home so that I'll at least know it's another country, it's another story. I'd like to know what the textbook looks like,
Yeah,
whether it's Dick or Jane or Mary or Harry or whatever.
yeah.
So he came home and he said, no, we can't take a textbook out of the school because we have to share it with 2 other people. So in other words, in the first grade,
Yes.
one textbook was for you and you and you. And if we failed to bring it back, it would mean that 3 students didn't have a textbook that day. So of course, that was the beginning of me being labeled.
A radical.
Of course. What the heck? When I married my husband, he told me the land of everything bigger, better, everything was, you know. And I said, they don't even have a textbook. So I was advised to go to the Board of Selectmen, which was not correct. Someone ill-advised me. So I went to the selectmen. They said, well, I'm sorry, we can't help you. You must go to the finance board. Because it's the finance board that clears the budget for the school supplies. So I did. I think I can name you still half the people that were there. They're dead now, but you know. One told me to go back to Russia. You don't like it here? You don't? You really don't? And I think you'd better go back where you came from. And this next person said, yes, you come from Russia, right? Yeah. It took until the next fiscal year to get a textbook. And I did it for every child in the first grade.
Yes.
But it takes, well, as we all know, it takes forever to get anything done
Yeah.
when
They
you're
didn't have a
talking
school
about
committee?
government.
Well,
They didn't have a school
go ahead.
committee?
You know, you hear this from a lady that ran for president of the United States. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to make a community what it is, and to get people don't realize that they need to get involved to make their community what it should be. We even had a friend who was a very good member of the society, and she had a goat. And we decided we needed to protest. We needed
Dilly-dally.
dilly-dally the goat. So we had a parade, believe it or not, down Main Street, goat and all.
So we did, we had a protest parade with the goat.
Yes.
And we wrote a sign and we had it on the goat.
Yep.
And we went through town and who drove the wagon? Gracie?
Probably.
Gracie Dudley, I think, drove the horse and wagon. Because we said, we're back to the old days. Right? We're back to the
Yeah.
horse and buggy days. Yeah. And I will, at the risk of being censored, I will tell you that we were in someone's barn making these signs so that we would have signs for the parade. And somebody wrote on a sign, Buck Schuster. So
Ouch.
we said, well, we can't do that as much as we feel that. We can't. And then the person that owned the property, who was a professor at Dean College, said, that's too good for him. She went over and she put UN in front. So we didn't take the sign, needless to say. Well, apparently, with today's politics, you could have got away with that.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So we marched in the parade. The interesting thing was that my husband at that time was on the school committee. And he had no clue
What we were up
that his wife was involved with this demonstration. He was very tolerant. He did love me.
Anyhow, again, Dan was very involved and got other people.
And we only lost
involved.
by what? A handful of votes.
Yeah, each
What was the-
time, it was 45 votes for regional
Was it? Yeah.
school. Twice for regionalization of the high school. And the third time, we said, what the heck? Let's go for the whole thing. Total K through 12. And we still lost by about 45 votes. Not exactly, but roughly. Because we felt that it was two good communities, similar, not one overpowering the other. It would have worked well. Who knows? But at that time, that's what we felt was so important. And then so the cry on the other side was, we'll keep our schools at any cost. Well,
Because Sutton didn't have a main street.
and there was no guarantee as to, of course it was going to be built in Sutton. What do you mean? We won't have any control. Well, anyhow, we lost by 45 votes. So keep our schools at any cost. So there was a school building committee. And they needed 2 Democrats. Well, I was one, and Ruth Kupka was the other, and she's passed now. But so there was a meeting as to what was going to transpire with the school committee, school building committee. And Dick Larkin, who was editor of the Tribune, which is a very different newspaper now, came through the door of, which is now the post office, and wanted to know why he had a policeman posted outside the door, and that they weren't letting him in. And lo and behold, Dan Cooney and Dick Larkin and Phil O'Grady came into the door, burst in and said,
Push them aside.
are you in executive session? And
Freedom of the press.
the other than Ruth Kupker and myself, they said, oh yeah, we're in executive session. And we said, no way. We did not vote to go into executive session. Therefore, Dick Larkin did get arrested because Mr. Schuster
So they put the handcuffs on him and sent him out.
and had grabbed his arm. So I ended up going to court in Blackstone
Court Blackstone?
because, yeah, to support Mr. Larkin, because that's what court was. Anyhow, the policeman dropped the charges. Therefore, the police chief, Mr. Blue, was not happy about that, so the police association group was up in arms. But anyhow, that's our battle, one of our many battles for better schools. And then it was, we had no zoning, we had no
Board of Health.
Board of Health,
No
no,
planning board.
no planning board, no
ZBA.
ZBA, and no, which I'm dealing with
Conservation.
right now, conservation, which we've got some better people on there right now. Anyhow, and on it went. And finally, all these boards that we needed. My husband was the one that presented the article for the conservation, and I said, don't ask for money, because they'll vote it down. Just get the conservation established. We need this to protect the water. And we're still dealing with issues like this, but it passed. They didn't ask for much money in the beginning because they had to get their feet on the ground and know what was needed in the community. And it's still, as you go along, things change and your needs are different. But again, I can't emphasize enough, get involved with your community. Because if you don't, you may look around and it's gone.
My mother always said, you can't open your mouth and
You know,
complain
and
if you
there's
don't do something.
there's another discussion that comes up from time to time, and that is when you get elected to a board, don't play it safe, because you're probably only going to be there for a short time. And I can say that Alan Chupka and Dan, my husband, and Chet and
Malone.
Eleanor,
Yeah.
4 people on the school committee, doubled the school budget. They hired an art teacher, and a physical education person, because we had a gym, we had all the equipment, but we didn't have anyone to have a class with. What was the other one? 3, I can't remember the other one.
Music, maybe?
There was
Music?
art, music,
Yeah.
music, that was right, the band, that's how the band started.
That's how it started.
Yeah.
So the band started at that time because they hired a band
Yep.
person, a music person. And they, until recently, I don't know what's happened with the band. I don't, I haven't seen a parade.
No, but they still. I
They're
think
still
have
working,
some
they
good-
still
playing
have
out there while I
music.
left home.
Okay.
So, anyhow, we
So
could
you do
go,
what you can when you've got the opportunity.
we could go on with many, many things. Never
Exactly,
ending.
exactly. But what we want to do is
With
give,
each other.
hold on, give a few minutes of this program to you, the audience, to ask questions.
Uh-oh.
What specifically might you be interested in their time as women in Douglas. We haven't even gotten into like holding office and things like that, but do you have any questions for them regarding your perspective of what Douglas is today and what it may have been like before, or a particular topic? Anybody? Angelina?
My mother so would have joined you guys as far as regionalization went and stuff with the schools. And it's funny because my mother would watch you in meetings and she would say, you know, I may not always agree with Shirley, but she'll tell you exactly how it is. and you, she didn't know what to make of you. So, but I just think, you know.
You only live once.
Yep.
No, but, you know, I think I can say this for all the people that worked hard to make things better, is that they were so sincere in doing this.
It was wonderful.
They really, they were so sincere, and we worked hard at it. And
We were bipartisan.
yeah, when I first got elected, my opposition asked for a recall, or a recount. At that time, we didn't have recall. And I'm like, this is my first time in office. And Tony Koppler and Charlotte, we were up at their house, and they said, don't worry, it's gonna work. You're okay.
So,
4 votes.
Wow.
And I served for 9 years.
When did the Douglas Civic Association come into existence?
Oh gee, along with all this, because that's when, and Blanche Perkins, great lady, wasn't well liked by the opposition because she said what she said like it was.
She thought.
And, but she was very talented. And she was the one that helped do all the things for the parade. And
Yeah.
yeah, she could paint, she could sew, she was very talented. And
Write signs.
yeah. But her son, Bill, who went to UMass, he said, and he's the one that started the bus transportation at UMass Amherst. And it's still going today. But he was very good. He said, you know, we need zoning. We need planning board. The town is going to grow, and we need these boards, or they're going to overrun us. Because right about that time, the Schuster call was, because people were pulling in trailers to live in. Well, we can't have, oh, we need those. Those are for my workers. I'm like, we were all like, well, fine, but you're putting them all down South Douglas, and this isn't going to work. So that's how we got into the zoning and the ZBA, and planning board, and all of the departments. Board of Health, one thing after another. Questions?
So I was wondering if you remember when Jenckes was still operating the store. Were you around then, the sisters?
It was a, what do I want to call it, a Goodwill type store by the time I got here. Just prior to that, maybe it was still operating. But I don't remember that much of it. You know, you could come in and buy whatever they had. They were getting older. They ended up, I do remember they were living upstairs and the store closed. My husband and a few others like Tony Koppler and, there's a whole list of people who got involved in obtaining the store for historical. But I got more involved as time went on, when you people were involved. Paul and Jean, yeah. Dan,
Yeah.
yeah.
Shirley,
Yes,
when you talk about rallying the town,
yeah.
I think Douglas Dump,
Oh, God.
that really brought the people out.
Yeah.
That's when I met you folks.
11 years.
When was that?
Trips into Boston.
Yeah.
When was that?
Oh, gosh. I'm not good at remembering times, just years. How long is this going to take? But that was after 3 tries at putting an airport here.
I remember that. That was the most ridiculous thing ever.
Seriously. People in Connecticut were working against the airports in this area more than some of our the original people getting involved. And I had family members in Uxbridge, some of my great aunts and so forth, that were like, oh, we're going to get an airport. We're like, what are you talking about? You won't be able to live here. Yeah.
So now it feels, both of you,
Yeah.
there's a lot of animosity between opposing political positions across the entire country. But hearing your stories about what you've been through in the past, is it really different now, or has it pretty much always been that way?
Well, I think it all came from the mill. I think the propaganda, the letters, the communication, there was a mailing that went out from the mill once a week maybe, or every 2 weeks, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But it was damning the project.
It's going to
saying
cost
that
too much
we
money.
were Pollyannas, we were undemocratic Democrats. It was name calling, and I mean really, really tough propaganda. I don't know if I've got any of those letters in my house. I could have,
We have some
Dan
of
could
them
have
here,
put
I
them
think.
somewhere. I asked you if you've got any.
I don't. I have campaign literature, I think, on Lisa from
Yeah.
when I ran. Yeah.
They were pretty brutal.
No,
And
there was,
they covered the whole town.
Yeah.
They blanketed the town with it. Because I think that the message was, if you do this with the education system, we're gonna have to shut the mill down.
and I said, we'll take it brick by brick.
That's right.
But there was a gentleman in town, and you say, well, you as an individual can't make a difference. Oh, no. There was a gentleman by the name of Charlie Rudek, and Leon knew him.
We all know him.
Yeah. But he would come around to homes. He would knock on doors
Yeah,
and try to
Oh, we all
get
did,
people
though.
out to vote.
yeah.
Yeah. And my father-in-law, believe it or not, I think he was a Democrat. My mother-in-law, yeah, but even then, when it came for schools or any big item, because he worked in the mill besides having a farm, so he was a hard worker. But even at that, you had a, did they really vote for good schools or what? Yeah, they loved their grandchildren, but it was money.
Yeah.
And what did they,
Opportunities,
what did they make? I mean, they worked hard for their money,
Yeah.
so,
But Schuster had a lot of pull.
oh, yeah.
And
But that was kind of normal in all the mill towns.
Yeah.
That's the way it was.
So when the mill closed, was it like a big change all of a sudden, or did everybody go, oh, nothing really changed?
Oh, yeah. I don't think anything changed that much.
That was like the 70s.
Lisa, one more thing.
Yeah, so no, when the mills left, we were experiencing throughout the Blackstone Valley an economic depression.
Yep.
Because it basically wasn't just one mill, it was numerous mills. And this was a real bottoming out of the economy, and it took a long time to come back. And that's why some of us, when a company comes in and promises you everything, you're cautious because you don't want to create that monoculture again where one company folds and they all go. So that's where we learn the lesson of some diversity in your economic base, just to stabilize your economy as it moves forward. So, yeah, so if you want to offer some closing thoughts or
Yeah, what I
anything else,
wanted
and
to
then-
get to is when I talked about coming here as an immigrant, one of the things that I think that very few people understand is that I came from a country that had a national health insurance, like most European countries. I, for instance, only found out in the last several years that Germany had a national health insurance on the books before Great Britain.
Really?
I didn't know that.
They do it.
I was surprised. In fact, it was in the works during the end of the war, which I thought I was just taken back with that. I couldn't understand that. So most European countries, I think the United States and undeveloped countries are the only ones that don't have a national health insurance. I came to this country with birth control, paid for by my government. Didn't cost me a damn thing. And in those days, remember, 1958, it was called a diaphragm. And if those of you who've never heard of it, it's like a large condom, a little more robust, needless to say. And you can use it for a while, maybe to have a child. Afterwards, then you have to go to your physician to be resized because your organs have changed sizes. Well, I came to this country with my diaphragm. I used to keep it in a vegetable dish. And my sister-in-law, who used to babysit, oh, Rick, stop.
No, I knew this was coming.
She was babysitting, right, with her mother, my mother-in-law. So she lifts the lid off the vegetable dish and says to my mother-in-law, "What is this?" And my mother-in-law, who worked for the Schusters, said, "Put the lid on, put the lid on. Cover it up, cover it up." So she wouldn't discuss it. So I get in touch with my doctor, and he happens to be a Catholic with the father of 8 children. And, oh no, we don't do diaphragms. So I sought out a Jewish doctor in Worcester, which is really why I want to go back to it. It's Worcester. And he also was, I found out afterwards, he was involved with Planned Parenthood. He was one of the board members. And he said, "Oh no, that's not a problem." He said, "You know, I'll size you, I'll get the order, and I'll send it. I could get them from New York." A lot of Jews in New York, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got my diaphragm. And the interesting thing was, we used to joke about Lynch's drugstore. I used to have a friend from New York who'd come and visit. He was a hellion of a comedian. And he was in the Lynch's drugstore one day with me. He came with his family. He was a friend of Dan's from the Air Force. And he's over on the other side of Lynch's. If you all remember how Lynch's was. And I was reading the greeting cards, and Phil hollers, "Hey, Shirley, I found out something. They've got colored condoms over here. There's purple, and there's blue, and there's pink. They keep them under the counter." Which, of course, is what they did. I didn't know that. But anyway, and I found this out. I did a little research on this. In the 50s, in the late 50s, the Worcester Foundation started to do research on the pill. Worcester, in Shrewsbury, at the Worcester Foundation. They had Dr. Block, who was apparently a practicing Catholic, and a Dr. Pincus. You've heard of Pincus? I know, yeah. He was a great researcher. Apparently, after it was manufactured,
Came out about 1970,
the
right?
Connecticut General Court went to the Supreme Court because it was a new product that had been declared safe. So the Connecticut court brought the case, and it was Griswold was the backer. And they determined that the pill could be used and sold to only married women. And it wasn't until the 70s that a single woman could buy the pill. So they've always been on our backs, you know? It goes back and back and back to when husbands used to beat us.
Not us, but.
Not us, no.
They wouldn't dare.
Anyway, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I came here, Massachusetts, Worcester. I had to find my diaphragm through Worcester and New York, by the way. And
I have a question.
yeah, and then it was designed in Shrewsbury.
I have a question. Was your husband from Douglas?
Sorry?
Why did you come to Douglas? Was your husband, Dan, was he from Douglas?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
I wanted to know
Yes.
how you ended up
Yes,
in Douglas.
but he would have taken me back. He would have gone back with me
Yeah.
if Nixon was elected.
Yes. Yeah.
He said, that's fine, I liked England. Well, it was a beautiful place. I came from a very, you know that,
Yeah.
the
What
South
part
Coast.
of England are you from?
The South Coast, the
Okay.
Jurassic Coast, Dorset.
Oh, Dorset.
Yeah.
I've heard that's beautiful.
If you look at the map, you'll see the Isle of Wight, and the whole coast is absolutely gorgeous.
Oh,
But
right
the
on the
weather's
water.
fabulous.
It's somewhere you should stay.
Anyone? Questions?
And I wanted, Gail, I wanted to mention the cemetery.
You got that going too, huh? The cemetery commission?
Gail and I served on the cemetery in Douglas, on the commission. And oh my God. We took out the rusty fencing, chicken wire it was, around the Evergreen Cemetery and repaired all of those granite posts. And it's a pittance of a budget. I mean, I don't know how I got it. I just don't know how we got it. We got $25,000.
Are you talking about evergreen or the?
No, Pine Grove.
Pine.
There was only one pine tree in there.
Yeah.
And it was in dire straits.
It was a mess.
It was a mess.
Yeah.
And I always remember that at that time, the highway department chief said, "You want us to take that rusty fence down?" I said, "Yeah." "And that over there?" "Yeah, all of it." "And this too?" "Yeah, yeah." "Well, how are you going to keep people out?" I said, "We don't want to.
How are we keeping them in?
We want people to come in, whether they're underground or on the ground." But anyway, that was the first project, and I didn't realize it was connected to the Congregational Church. So it had exactly the same chain on the small granite posts as that church. And I found that out afterwards, much afterwards. Anyway, so we got that one done. And then we went to South Street, and we got those beautiful wrought iron gates off, and got them lifted off the foundation. We sent them off to get sandblasted and painted, and get them established back on. And that was as much as we could squeeze out of a budget. But we found good people, that would Because he'd say, how much do you have?
Yeah.
And we'd say, we don't have much.
Well, again, and Vicki, you brought up about the dump and the project, the big project. And some people were like, wow, this is going to be tax revenue. So look how much money we can get from this. And they couldn't give us really any specific figures, but all kinds of figures were tossed around. And in the name of Vinnie Barletta.
If he was still alive, he had tenacity, he kept coming back.
Well, anyhow,
The only cure for which is death.
he just was very persistent, had a lot of political contacts, and we just kept at it. And thank God for the people in Webster, because they were like, hey, wait a minute, Webster Lake, this is going to come down into Webster Lake. And the things such as, okay, where are the fault lines? You give us this map, this topographical map, and all these fault lines, and they get to here, but why didn't, to the person that was doing it, why did you stop there? Because that's all I was paid to do. Well, wait a minute. We want to know where the rest of the lines go, and we'll pay you to show us. And yeah, right down into Webster Lake. And if it leaks, you bet. And also, it was going to leak into the res, which eventually could leak into Lake Manchac. And I had a hard time convincing people that when we had a hurricane, the res overflowed in the back onto Northwest Main Street and into Lake Manchac. And my husband and I went swimming in the middle of Northwest Main Street, where all the water was, crystal clear. Yeah, there are connections if it overflows. So that was our main reason for, again, water. We cannot let this happen. And how many trucks a day are going to come through town? Oh, 45. Who's going to count them? Oh, the citizens will tell us. What?
Excuse me?
So, again, another battle. Airplane, airports, the dump. There's a few other things.
Well, Paul Salucci walked through.
Well, thank God, Paul Salucci needed the votes up here, because we were out on 395, where cars were coming off to go home from work. No dump. I still have no dump signs in my barn.
I walked those woods with Leon.
Oh yes, many times. And again, the great people from Webster were out there finding fairy shrimp and
Spotted salamanders.
all kinds of, yeah.
Well, folks, I'm sure you can all agree that these two are definitely have been role models for our community. So let's give them a hand for doing this. So we're hoping we can make this sort of thing an annual event where we can celebrate Women's History Month with women from our own community who can tell us stories like this and who can guide us and offer us advice. So we invite you to partake of some treats, and we have, I think, some coffee over here if you'd like it, but we do have refreshments thanks to our hospitality committee. And again, I want to thank also Lori Church and the volunteers for setting up the room and being so kind. She couldn't be here tonight, but she's the vice president of the Douglas Historical Society, and Shirley Mosczynski is the president. So if you have any questions or want to talk about other programs we could bring that are like this, feel free to talk to us after we wrap up. But stay and socialize a little bit. That's how we get to know each other and do these battles together. So
Hey, Lisa,
thanks so much.
Did you learn Polish?
Thank you so much, and we'll wrap it up for now. Have a good night.